Welcome to Lead for Good, a podcast for nonprofit leaders of all titles and all experience levels. This is a show where the audience will meet and get to know top nonprofit leaders. Together, we will take a deep dive into nonprofit leadership, endeavoring to uncover and unpack the most important characteristics, traits, strategies, and actions of successful nonprofit leaders. Through this journey together, we desire to help you, the nonprofit leader, grow your knowledge and capabilities to lead for good. We want you to achieve your full potential as leaders in the sector. So, welcome to the conversation. We're glad you joined us today. Without further delay, let's join our host, Chris Looney, as he interviews yet another extraordinary leader who is truly leading for good. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lead for Good, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and leadership models shaping the future of mission-driven organizations. Today's episode dives into a leadership structure that is gaining traction in the nonprofit sector, but still raises important questions. What does it look like to share the top job? How does co-leadership work in a large, complex, high-impact organization? And what does it require personally, strategically, and culturally? Our guest today helps lead one of the most recognized and transformative nonprofit organizations in the country, and he's doing so as co-CEO. Today, we're joined by Steve Delgado, co-CEO of Homeboy Industries, based in Los Angeles. Homeboy Industries is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. Founded by Father Greg Boyle, the organization has become nationally known for its commitment to radical belonging, healing, and providing pathways to employment and restoration for those who have been formerly gang involved or incarcerated. And Steve brings deep experience in executive leadership and organizational management to this work. And as co-CEO, he shares responsibility for stewarding a large team, complex social enterprises, national visibility, and a mission that changes lives every day. So today we're going to explore what it means to co-lead at this level, why the organization chose this model, and what the broader nonprofit sector can learn from their experience. So for listeners who may not know the full scope of Homeboy Industries, Steve, can you kind of give us a brief overview of the organization today?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me, Chris. It's really a pleasure to be here, particularly with someone who has done so much to push nonprofit organizations and our work higher. So it's great to be here with you. And thanks for the introduction. That CEO job you described sounds hard, and it's making me nervous. So hopefully we'll continue to plug away. But yeah, Homeboy Industries, as you described, Chris, we're the largest reentry organization in the world for formerly incarcerated, formerly gang involved people. We have 10,000 people a year who are walking through our doors seeking a better life for themselves and their families and their communities, frankly. And we bring a blend of services together in a special way, all anchored by, as you said, this notion of radical kinship, of creating places where people are safe, seen, and cherished, and doing that for 10,000 people who receive the services that they need in order to build stability in their lives and rediscover their unshakable goodness, and then work in one of our 16 businesses or social enterprises to build the skills that they need to then foster economic mobility in their own lives once they leave our program. So it's a big operation. We've got 3 program offices, 300 staff, 16 businesses located throughout LA County. So it takes a village for sure. And one of the notable things that I should mention is that 65% of those 300 staff members that work so hard every day to help the people who are walking through our doors change their lives on their journey are former clients. So part of the secret sauce of creating places where people are safe, seen, and cherished is about building power from within our community, really fostering that, and having our former clients now pass along their expertise and the art of healing, if you will, to the people who are walking through our doors. So we're really proud about that.
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful model, and everyone I've met is just a beautiful person at the organization. And I, try to try to emulate Father Boyle, Father Greg, as often as I possibly can because he just speaks with an authenticity and a love for
Mm.
humanity that is so evident. And when you said radical kinship, it just sort of sparked something in me. I just love that concept. I mean, we're taught to be radically inclusive and love radically, right? And I think sometimes the love word scares some people, and so to
Yeah,
think
for
about it
sure.
as
You know,
radical
one of the
kinship.
Definitely, yeah. You know, one of the things we're actually talking about now is we're in the process of putting a new strategic plan and vision in place that will chart our course for the next 5 to 10 years, frankly. And the underlying premise of our plan is scaling love and tenderness. So as we think about how we scale, we're not necessarily talking about scaling our businesses or scaling this program model or that program model. We understand that really it's the values and this notion of radical kinship and love and tenderness that need to be scaled because that is the secret sauce. That cultural attribute of Homeboy is what makes for 38 years has made Homeboy a thriving organization. And the only way for that to continue is by starting with love and tenderness and then
Yeah.
ending somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it also just to me, I get goosebumps thinking about how such a hardened group of individuals who have just had to survive on the streets in difficult ways can be the ones that express the most love or the most tenderness. And it just shows the world that it's possible and that it's within all of us to be that way. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go down a rabbit hole
No,
there,
you're
but
right on. Yeah, we're all unshakably good. My co-CEO reminds me of that about myself every day. She says, "Don't forget you're unshakably good."
I love it. Well, speaking of that, that co-CEO model is still relatively uncommon in the nonprofit sector. So I'd be
Mm.
interested to know how Homeboy came to adopt that structure.
Yeah, it was part of broader succession planning, Chris, that Father Greg, our former CEO, who's now a senior advisor within the organization, Tom Bozo, the board, Shirley, and myself began talking about well over a year prior to us actually stepping into the co-CEO role and working intentionally on that succession plan. And a big part of the thinking was how Shirley and I have strengths that are hugely complementary, and how Homeboy is a really complex organization, as we just finished talking about, right? There's a lot of moving parts to what we're doing at Homeboy between the businesses that we operate, the social service agency that we operate. And what made sense to all of us was that we would team up and leverage those complementary strengths to move the agency higher and also just recognize that it's a complex organization. I mean, I'm always it's always a little bit mind-boggling to think about billion-dollar organizations that are stewarded forward by one person. And we've as a either as a in industry we've fallen into that mode of thinking. And in talking with others about this, I always sort of say, like, when we talk about our families, we sometimes say, hey, having two adults in a family structure actually is
Right.
is actually can be helpful, right? If you have a household of folks, and many folks are blessed to have that, many folks, aren't quite as fortunate. But when it comes to running a really complex organization, we don't necessarily say that, right?
We don't.
So what's the difference there? And a little bit of it is habit in some respect. A little bit of it is, frankly, in my opinion, a patriarchal view on what leadership and leadership models that sort of, have
Agreed.
been embraced and just carried forward from generation to generation. So really thinking creatively about the strengths that Shirley and I have and how we can team up to move the organization forward was the driving factor in coming to this model.
Yeah, good. I appreciate that. And when you first stepped into that co-CEO role, what surprised you most about sharing the top position?
Well, I would say at Homeboy, there's always been sort of a shared leadership perspective.
Okay.
We have a founder, right? Father Greg Boyle, who continues to be this organization's spiritual leader in almost every respect, right? What Father Greg says matters here, and
Hmm.
as long as he is at Homeboy and doing what he does, that will always be the case, right? In fact, um, in as much as his voice is heard around the world, we want to amplify his voice even more so. So internally, even when Father Greg, as founder and CEO, decided to sort of separate the CEO role, and that's when Tom came on board. Historically, our latest CEO, there was a fairly significant leadership dynamic that Greg was still carrying within the organization, right? So it's not necessarily a new phenomenon for there to
Sure.
be uh, pretty significant leadership voices that are moving the organization forward, and Homeboy has always made room for those voices, right? So uh, at Homeboy, I think maybe we were a little bit more prepared, just culturally, to be able to embrace that perspective of having dual leadership voices. And I guess what I would say I was surprised about was how seamless that ended up being
Good.
in terms of Shirley and my voice uh, coming together to lead the organization and having that voice be heard and respected and thought of as the right combination of voices to lead the organization forward.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. And how do you and Shirley divide responsibilities? Is it functional? Is it strategic, relational, or something more fluid than that?
Yeah, there's a combination of ways that we continue to evolve on this front. We just actually finished our first year as co-CEOs this past week, and we went into it thinking that we would have fairly hard lines around the structural organization way that we approached it. The easiest way for one to think about it would be that Shirley, as chief program officer coming into this role, would oversee the social service agency and have responsibility for that, all of our programs. And with a background in industry that I bring to the table and the advancement piece that I would oversee the businesses, right?
Mhm. Okay.
Two different organizations. And I would say that that has mostly emerged as being the
Fair.
structural dynamic by which we manage, but there's a lot of gray in that, right?
Sure.
A lot of gray in that. And I think there's probably more gray than people would have anticipated. Our board, maybe even external stakeholders, in terms of how it is that we manage the entire organization and enterprise together. And a lot of that gray area really is in the place of strategy, right? Because there is only one homeboy, and homeboy needs to work strategically for one homeboy. So Shirley and I spend a lot of time outside of the tactics of thinking about the social service agency and the social enterprises in the strategic space.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really remarkable because now that you put it into my head about the sort of co-parenting model or head of household being shared responsibility, I understand it so much better when it's put into the co-CEO context, because I think about my relationship with my wife and the number of things that we so clearly identify as our responsibility, and then those things that are the gray areas where we have to actually make decisions together, or we have to figure out who's going to do that this time or that time. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that as well, with the complicating factor that you're such a large organization and you've got a board that you also have to include, and more staff members than we have kids. So anyway,
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, Shirley and I know that either one of us could run this organization by ourselves. And we're very transparent with each other about that, right? That Shirley could surely be the CEO without Steve, definitely. Could
it's
Steve be the
great.
CEO without Shirley? Definitely, right? In my household, could I be, um, a single parent without another parent? I certainly could. It would be a lot harder, right? It would
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
lot harder,
Well, maybe
right?
not as
So,
effective.
and maybe not as effective, right? So we acknowledge that dynamic in sort of the same analogy that you just
Yeah.
referenced.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So what sort of disciplines or agreements have to be in place for co-leadership to work well? Maybe that's one, that you have this recognition that either of you could be the sole CEO, and things would be fine. But I'm sure there's some other things that have to be in place for this to work as well. What would those be?
Yeah, well, for Shirley and me, we've always, for lack of a better term, been on the same page. So, well, I would say our leadership point of view and the values really that we have as leaders are very, very aligned. Um, Coming into the role, we decided that we were going to sort of double down on our values, both as leaders, but also organizationally, and really lead through a lens of those values. And that was really important for us because in thinking about just the broader organization and their need for that lens, and what would that lens be from two folks, in thinking about our work and setting a baseline for the way that we would approach and make decisions both together and separately. Having those values and being values aligned was super, super important to us. So this value alignment piece, we've had a set of values at Homeboy that we've worked through for years. We brought those back into the fold, and frankly, Shirley and I have really led through a shared lens of health and wellness for the organization. So all of the decisions that we make and that we prioritize are really anchored by this lens of what is going to be healthy and what is going to make the organization more well. And having that foundation established frees both of us up, frankly, to make decisions independently and trust each other that those decisions are going to be anchored by those values and this lens of health and wellness.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, because I was just going to ask how you kind of ensure there's alignment when decisions need to be made quickly. And I suppose it might be impossible or not possible necessarily to get together and figure out what the answer is. You have alignment, you have the shared values, you have some sense of confidence in the other person to make a wise decision. Is that kind of what happens when there does need to be a quick decision that's made by one or one of you?
Yeah, we're making decisions independently all day long
Good.
when it
It's good to
comes
know.
to
I mean, that's super
yeah, yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah. When it comes to the structural pieces that we mentioned, surely perhaps a little bit more leaning toward the program side, me a little bit leaning more so toward the businesses and the advancement and maybe some of the finance pieces, right? So we know that we can't make every decision together, and that would be unhealthy for the organization. So we're making decisions all day long, independent of each other, with 100% trust in the decisions that each of us are making. And again, the reason that we are able to do that is because we've agreed to a set of values and seeing the organization through this lens of health and wellness. And with that in place, we have confidence in each other to make whatever decision is necessary. And then, every day, literally every day, we spend a fair amount of time talking about what's going on in the organization, talking about the decisions that we've made, updating on any decisions that we think each other really needs to know about, and moving the organization forward in that capacity.
Yeah, super. Well, what happens when you disagree on something? What does that look like? How does it stay healthy in terms of a kind of having a healthy disagreement?
Yeah, I would say that we've worked pretty hard to avoid um, situations where a decision needs to be made and we don't agree on that decision. So I'm gonna draw another analogy, almost like that's akin to like performance reviews, these simple performance reviews. Managing 101 in performance reviews, you always sort of like are saying, hey, there shouldn't be a surprise, right? There shouldn't be a surprise when you're conducting a performance review with someone. And you should say, hey, here's how
Right.
I'm seeing something. And then the person who's receiving the review sees it, completely in the opposite direction, right?
Right.
Something's amiss there, right? In that relationship that's creating that amount of space to occur, right? So Shirley and I give ourselves time, to make sure that we're processing big decisions and having the right level of conversation around those decisions so that when the decision needs to be made and when we need to, come to a place where we know that decision needs to be made, we've gotten to a point where there's not that gap, right? So we're thinking forward about the bigger decisions that we need to make, really putting those on our radar and giving ourselves the time to process. And then for many of the tactical decisions, we're relying on the lens of the values that I discussed and really trusting each other to move forward on that front. So that's how we've approached it so far. And we haven't, in our first year, we really haven't had moments in time that have been hard from a disagreement kind of perspective.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, you explained why you've avoided a lot of that in the shared values and time together and trust. So that's clearly evident. What about the structure? Have you seen that you can kind of point to where Homeboy has been strengthened? It's been a year. This I wouldn't call it an experiment. It is the way. But how have you seen the way strengthen the organization?
Yeah, I think primary way has been in the organization recognizing that it's one homeboy. And when you have 16 businesses and a social service agency, what can emerge are two different organizations that are aligned, but not necessarily thinking of themselves as being as connected and as dependent on each other in terms
Right.
of serving its mission, serving the organization's mission. So having two voices that are really aligned on the values piece and on the health and wellness piece of the organization has made a huge difference in with our executive team and with managers and our directors team when it comes to disparate departments seeing themselves as one homeboy in a certain kind of way, right? And
Mhm.
Shirley and I've talked about one homeboy throughout our entire year and making sure that everything that we're doing as an organization continues to be aligned. And it's a really interesting thing to me because I think actually two voices, one would think that maybe one voice would help on that front a little bit more because, one voice there's one voice, and this is the voice that matters. But again, I think this is a place where actually having two CEOs has paid dividends, because Shirley and I are aligned. We're able to evangelize and set the culture for the organization. It's like having two agents at work, at all
Right.
times, within the organization. So culturally, aligning on values, aligning on the programs and the businesses. I think there's been a lot of benefit to having two people do that as opposed to one person do it.
Yeah, yeah. Would anyone say that there's a good cop, bad cop happening in this scenario, or is it just both good cops?
It's a good question. That's a good question. I think it depends on the circumstance. I don't think we ever, certainly it's not a strategy. Shirley and I never talk about who is a good cop or a
Whose
bad
turn
cop.
it is?
Yeah, whose turn it is. We don't approach the organization with that frame of reference at all. Um, you know, the uh, the funny piece of it is that folks in the organization have started referring to Shirley and Steve as SNS. So, like, sometimes when we put out an email to the entire organization, we sign off as SNS.
Yes.
And others have said, "Oh, what does SNS stand for? Does one stand for soul, and does one stand for strategy?" And Shirley and I sort of laugh at that, because the thought is that maybe Shirley is more of the soul part of the organization. I'm more of the
Right,
strategy part of
right.
the
Interesting.
organization, right? And it's not that way at all. But I always joke with the team and with folks. I say, "Hey, I'm a soulful leader. I have soul." It's like, come
That's
on,
right.
And Shirley certainly is a strategic leader as well. So I think, again, there's this blending of soul and strategy that takes place amongst the leadership that we're bringing to the table. So it's not really good cop, bad cop. It's more of a blending of soul and strategy, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when we're talking about an organization serving formerly incarcerated individuals, many times, I think it's probably appropriate to find a different analogy than the one I used. But so often I find myself cringing at some of the analogies that I use, because I think I finally start thinking about the deeper meaning of them, right? And that has a probably a very sour kind of history when it comes to Los Angeles and the population
Yeah.
that we're talking about. So I don't want to at all kind of connect you and Shirley to that, right? So the analogy I'm going to work on, but I think it is fascinating about the soul and strategy. That's a different way of approaching a yin and a yang type of management or leadership. That how could it be that one person has those two very kind of different sets of skills, the right brain, left brain working, the soft and hard, the whatever it is. So I appreciate that you haven't consciously kind of had to do that, because you probably do have a bit of both in your quiver, if you will.
Yeah, and we also think about, sometimes somebody came to us the other day and said, "Oh, you guys in different situations are, one of you are the feet and one of you are the hands," right? So,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
in particular situations, maybe I'm more of the feet and Shirley's more of the hands. And in other situations, she's more of the feet and I'm more of the hands. So,
Right,
yeah,
right.
because we're in good touch with each other, we just have a natural sort of way, I think, about us to determine who needs to be the feet and who needs to be the hands at any moment in time.
That's right. And I'm sure you also have the same type of capacity to be the head or the heart, or the head and the
Exactly.
heart,
Yeah.
and all of
Similar.
that.
Yep.
So
Yeah, for sure.
wonderful. Wonderful. Well, do funders and donors respond differently to this model? Like, and if so, how have you navigated that? Are there certain donors that are yours and certain donors that are Shirley's? Or like, it's fascinating to me, because so often a donor is like, I want to have a relationship with the CEO. And now it's like, I want to have a relationship with both CEOs. Tell me
Yeah,
more.
or they have a choice, of which, whether they want both or one, right?
Right.
There's multiple options available. I've been raising money now, not too long, but since 2010. And as you know, prior to 2010, I was in industry.
Not too long. That's
Yeah, not too
16
long.
years,
Yeah,
Steve.
no, 16 years. Yeah, but prior to that, I was in industry. So I came into the nonprofit world in the area of advancement, as you know, Chris, sort of as at the time, all the way back 2010, as a non-traditional advancement person, right? Which was sort of a little bit of a thing at some point, and
Maybe the best
maybe,
kind,
yeah,
non-traditional
yeah,
advancement.
maybe it still is, but I think probably less so than it was, 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So I've been able to, I've been fortunate to be able to see a lot of different scenarios around the C-suite in fundraising capacities, right, and settings. And one of the things that I really believe in at Homeboy is Shirley and Steve fundraising together. And I think that having seen again lots of different conditions that strategy and soul, in whatever way you want to think about it, really have an ability to connect with donors of all kinds. And what ends up emerging and has emerged over the past year of our fundraising together is that there's a great appreciation for the thoughtfulness that is coming into the CEO function from both a strategy and a soul perspective, whether it be Shirley and me being strategy or soul, it doesn't really matter. There's a sort of seamlessness there. So frankly, I'm really excited about fundraising with Shirley, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to fundraise together. Is we need to do that to keep the organization moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it does, from my perspective, help on so many levels. The additional hands and feet to do the work, the appeal of a different chemistry to a particular donor, the sense that the donor has that you're as a leader able to accomplish a lot more. The someone's listening, someone's speaking at all times, not just speaking and not hearing. So there's so many interesting benefits I can understand through it, and you can push each other and keep each other accountable as well, which is fascinating to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, donor investors want who are interested in making transformative gifts. They want to know that there's a 360-degree view on how the organization is moving forward. Shirley and I are able to bring to life, in many respects, that 360 view and leadership view. Probably, a view that, well, either one of us on our own, it would be harder for us to do, frankly, right?
Right.
Again, I think I think there's a lot of opportunity for us on that front, and we really haven't run into issues so far where donors have said, "Oh, I'm confused about this," right? And if a donor really does want to work with Shirley a little bit more on something, or if a donor really does want to work with me a little bit on something, fantastic, great.
Right.
That's absolutely a-okay.
Right. Or the two of you, here is Father Greg, or here is
Exact, exact,
Tom Bozo,
exact,
or here's
exactly.
our board chair.
Exactly, exactly. So, it's meeting, it really gives us the ability, I think, to meet donors where they are, which is, you know, what anybody needs to do in meeting people who are wanting to be philanthropic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on a personal level, how has this model kind of stretched you personally? How has it taught you things that maybe you didn't think you needed to be taught? How do you kind of think about this and what it's done for you as a leader?
No, I think I need to be taught a lot of things, first of all. I mean, we're as leaders, we're constantly on a journey of learning, right? And we need to
I
be
love
committed.
it. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
We need to be committed to lifelong learning, and if we're not committed to that, then we've sort of lost our way as leaders. And I think this co-CEO model has absolutely fashioned a structure that enables that, right? Because again, having multiple perspectives on issues brings to light things that you didn't think about, right?
Right.
Things that maybe your experience set would not have created for you as an option. So, learning from another lifelong learner is has been really transformational for me as a leader, just because I've been able to build that set of experiences very quickly into the way that I think about things. So it's been transformational on that front. The other piece is, I think, um, to say that our relationship, the co-CEO model relationship, doesn't require more patience in a certain kind of way, I think would probably be untruthful. You need to be more patient. If you have a partner, that a business partner, Shirley is basically my business partner, who's helping lead an organization forward, you need to give each other the room and the time to process and to hear the other perspective, right? And that requires patience. Um, I would say that probably, in all of the executive coaching I've received over the years in leadership programs, I'm someone who's prone to maybe not be as patient as a great leader needs to be,
Mm.
and so that in many respects, just the nature of the co-CEO model has probably enhanced my own leadership ability, and that I've been able to bring a little bit more patience to the decision making and communication processes needed from the CEO chair.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that you recognize that. So great. Are there certain leadership habits that have become non-negotiable in this co-CEO structure that you've discovered?
Nothing that we've talked about specifically, other than um, we, I think, have each committed to each other to always champion each other's
Mm.
leadership. And I think that would probably be, not speaking for Shirley so much, although maybe on this one, I try not to speak for her ever, but I think we would probably both be disappointed in our shared leadership if we weren't always championing each other's leadership.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably be the one piece that we're both committed to, and we wouldn't want to stray from that.
Yeah. I love it. Well, what advice would you give to leaders out there that might be considering a shared executive model?
Yeah, so this is a tough one because there's so many shades of gray, right? I would say though maybe three pieces. One would be um, the co-CEOs themselves and who they are as people. It's not for every probably CEO personality. Shirley and I have CEO personalities, but I can think of lots of CEOs that I've worked with or been um, exposed to where the co-CEO model would not work, and and that's super important, right? You need to find two folks who are aligned and have sort of the temperament and leadership point of view where, and frankly, like I would just also say humility. It takes a lot of humility to be co-CEO. I think, um, it's hard to say humility, maybe from Shirley's perspective, I won't give myself that trait, but she's a very humble person. Um, so you need to find the right two people who are going to be able to work in that capacity. The values piece, I think, is, again, I've talked about it, but from our perspective, it's just so important to be anchored by a shared set of values that is going to drive the organization forward and the decision making forward. Without that values piece being in place, there's a lot of room for for miscalculation, for sure. That would be an important piece. And then Shirley and I joke frequently, but just thinking about other structural support systems that are important can go a long way. We sort of always say we have a marriage counselor, but part of the thinking going into this was that we needed to create space for ourselves to develop our professional relationship, how we were going to work together, sort of, as I said earlier, getting ahead of the curve
Yeah.
on disagreements, right? And having that structure in place when disagreements do happen. So we have an executive coach that we share that helps us through our journey of co-leadership. So thinking about structural elements there, not overlooking that, I think is another important piece.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, the marriage counselor, that's awesome. I mean, but again, so appropriate. I just love the fact that so much of our conversation has related it to a family dynamic, the sort of family unit, and how that works. And there is nothing wrong about having support and wisdom and guidance from a mentor, a coach. You don't have to call it a therapist, right? If you don't want, it's just someone that can help you define the structures that need to be in place so you can work through some of the most difficult challenges that get put before you. And I love that concept. So just two more questions. Um, and the first one is, do you think that there are certain sectors or kind of nonprofit models where the co-CEO model works particularly well? Or in your mind, can it work in any type of nonprofit organization as long as you have the right sort of people that are willing to co-lead?
Yeah, I would say the latter, Chris. I think that's probably a better place that to start, where I would start. I think there is some aspect of scale that needs to be in place in order for the co-CEO model to work as well.
Okay.
So having an organization that has scaled and is maybe geographically more complex or programmatically more complex, I think there's there's actually maybe more of a application for the co-CEO model. But I think it's Netflix. Maybe is Netflix now
Mm.
operating under a co-CEO model, and there's a number of organizations that I've seen recently that are moving in this direction, not even in the not-for-profit space. So I think there's gonna be a wave of organizations that are going to experiment with this model over the next 5 years, and I think we're going to see a sea shift in a change here in terms of how complex organizations are thinking about their governance and leading from the CEO chair.
Good, good. And speaking of governance, so the last question I'd ask is, um, how does the board impact any part of the co-CEO role? What does the board look like that might be different in this particular dynamic? What have you learned about managing a board? I mean, we could probably do an entire show just on that
Yeah,
relationship, but
yeah.
just like real quickly, is there just something you'd share about working with the board in this kind of role?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, and probably the fourth point that I would raise in terms of lessons or things to consider if you're considering the co-CEO model. And obviously, in our case, the board and the executive committee of the board were very, very involved in helping to fashion the co-CEO plan as we were thinking about putting this into place. So there was a lot of board involvement and a lot of board dialogue that took place as we put the co-CEO model into place.
Yeah.
So having the board involved, having a board chair that is is ready for a co-CEO model and can think about the relationship in that context, I think is very important. We're very lucky as we lifted off with the co-CEO model. We're very lucky to have a board chair. We talk to our board chair pretty frequently. We're always mostly talking to her together, who is really thinking about the both of us and has actually advocated for some of the structural pieces that we put into place, like our quote unquote marriage counselor, right? So managing the board and having a board that's ready for the co-CEO model, I think, is an important piece for sure.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, good advice.
We're
And Steve,
fortunate to have that.
yeah, no, and it might be a requirement for this
For
to
sure.
function
For sure.
function
For sure.
well. I mean, you can't have co-CEOs, and you can't have a strong CEO if you don't have a supportive board who's behind the top leader and
I
the
think
leadership.
there are anecdotally what's come back to me and to Shirley as well is that even though the board was in favor of this, there were some board members probably who were more skeptical about the model working versus not
Of
working.
course.
And what's come back our way has been feedback from board members who sort of confessed that they had concerns about the model, and now having seen it in action, or seeing Shirley and me working together in settings where they have been there, have said,
Right.
this makes a lot of sense to me. Now
Yeah.
I see why this makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think there's that piece to anecdotally reflect on as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my personal hope is that it is a model that continues to expand across the nonprofit sector for all of the reasons that we've shared today. And Steve, I just wanted to thank you for your leadership and for offering such an honest look at what it means to share responsibility at the highest level of a mission-driven organization. Homeboy Industries stands out as a powerful example of what is possible when healing, opportunity, and strong leadership intersect. And your insights into co-leadership provide an important lens for nonprofit executives navigating complexity, growth, and sustainability. So to our listeners, if today's conversation sparked new thinking about leadership structures in your own organization, we encourage you to continue to dialogue with your board and senior team. And would also encourage you to check out our other podcasts, Mastering Fundraising and the Nonprofit Edge. All of them, we speak with leaders in the sector and really drill into some of the elements of leadership that are specific highlights of their leadership journey. And we're always glad to have you on the journey with us. So we just, in the meantime, encourage you all to lead for good, and we'll see you back on our next podcast real soon. Thanks all.
Thank you for joining us for this most recent episode of Lead for Good. Our passion is helping nonprofit leaders reach their full potential as leaders, and we sincerely hope this episode has been edifying for you. Please subscribe to this podcast to not miss any of our Lead for Good conversations. We welcome your feedback, suggestions, and comments via email at hello@fulcrumleader.com. Lead for Good is a production of Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership. Please visit us on the web at www.fulcrumleader.com. Until next time, we wish you all the best and encourage you to always lead for good.